Welcome, everybody. Just giving everyone a few minutes to join in, and we'll be right back to you. Looking forward to a discussion today on unlocking the potential for new parks in Toronto. Nice to see people joining. We'll get started momentarily. While people are joining the session, I'll just introduce myself. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'm Professor Nina Marie Lister at the School of Urban and Regional Planning here at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I'm really especially happy to introduce the session today, which is being hosted by our colleagues at City Building Ryerson, whose renaming is in process. Just while we all join and get settled, I'd like to remind us and share some gratitude as well. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. In acknowledging this, I also share gratitude with elders past, present, and future in the land that we all work in, and I hope that this work honors that land. We're really excited today, actually, to share this work. This session is about unlocking the potential funding for new parks in Toronto, and with that, in the context of biodiversity conservation. That's how this project came about. The importance of parks, of course, has been underscored recently, both in the media and in scholarly research. Many sought refuge in parks amidst the public health restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, parks really came to the fore in the papers. We saw the importance of the outdoors on our mental health and wellness. And I'd also say that the financial and health benefits of nature, if you will, urban nature, are something we work on in the Ecological Design Lab here at Ryerson, where this work originated with Jean-Francois' research he's going to talk about. This has been well documented in academic and scientific literature, but really the focus for today is identifying funding for new parks. This is a really challenging aspect. We know land prices are at all-time high, and parks, of course, appear often to be at the bottom of that list. So today we're really going to shift our focus towards ways to unlock this new funding. Right now, the City of Toronto is reviewing its Parkland dedication rate, and it's going to be enacting a new bylaw for September 2022 of this year in order to continue collecting money for parkland development from development projects, broadly speaking, and that will address demand for parks from a growing urban population. This is part of that ongoing research. Just a few housekeeping notes before I turn it over and introduce our speaker today, Jean-Francois Obregon Murillo. Today's presentation will be about 30 minutes of research discussion, and there'll be about 10 minutes for us to have some selected questions from the audience. Apologies in advance if we don't get to all your questions, but I would encourage you to submit these using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The session is being recorded, and you'll be able to find the recording on the City Building Ryerson website in the coming days. I'm very pleased to introduce Jean-Francois Obregon Murillo. I had the opportunity to work with Jean-Francois during his master's research project. He also worked in the Ecological Design Lab with me. He's about to graduate, so we're very pleased to celebrate that, Jean-Francois. He's a 2022 graduate of the Master of Planning and Urban Development degree here at Toronto Metropolitan University. He also runs the Urban Hulk, which you may have seen on social media. This is a consultancy focused on socially responsible investing and urban planning, and on our Twitter and Instagram feeds through the lab and on his own social media platform. He joins us with an honors in business administration from the Ivey Business School at Western University, and I'm really pleased that he received a Shirk Master's Scholarship in 2020-2021. These are very competitive, and he's done some amazing work with that. He completed a major research paper examining practices to remove barriers at the City of Toronto for using available funds and this in the context of new financial tools for parkland acquisition, but he specifically focused on ways advance biodiversity conservation in parks as well, which was part of the research stream that we support in the Ecological Design Lab. In this session, he'll really be delving into this research and expanding on it for insights going forward to build a biodiverse and equitable municipal park system in Toronto. I'd also emphasize that this research came out of an internship that he also completed for us last year. And he's really been focused quite significantly both on the components of biodiversity and the new financial tools. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about this. And please welcome Jean-Francois. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nina Marie. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so just give me a moment. Okay, just give me one more second here. That's not what I want. Okay, here we go. So thanks to Nina Marie Lister for the initial and original insight regarding Parkland Reserve funds at the City of Toronto and why these funds are not being used quickly enough to purchase more parkland. This is an overview of what I'll be looking at today. It's worth noting that the major research paper focused on how new financial tools can be used to purchase parkland, and I described over 25 of these tools in the paper. I interviewed over 30 people in Canada, Costa Rica, the UK, and the US who work in development, government, NGOs, and consulting. This project started about a year ago and ended in late April of this year. Just give me a moment here. And I wanted to highlight this quote by former Atmospheric Fund Executive Director Philip Jessup. It captures how I find there is a beauty to Toronto's parks, especially along its ravines, and that does not get appreciated enough, but it is so important to the city's park system. And there's an opportunity for us to celebrate that as part of our city's identity and perhaps through purchasing more parkland. So a breakdown of this issue, the City of Toronto's alternative parkland dedication rate. Planning in the province of Ontario is governed by the Planning Act. So developments in Ontario municipalities dedicate parkland under Section 42 of the Planning Act. This can be done in 3 ways in Toronto. 1, it is dedicated physically on site by developers when enough space is available on a development project site. 2, in municipalities like Toronto, there's an alternative parkland dedication rate that sets criteria for how much parkland can be physically dedicated off-site of a development. This is when parkland cannot be conveyed on a development site, and this calculation is based on a property size. Thirdly, and where a good part of this MRP was focused on, is Cash-In-Lieu, which is contributed when parkland cannot be obtained physically. These funds can be used towards parkland acquisition, and this calculation is based on a property's value. As development has picked up, especially during the pandemic, the areas of parkland deficiency in Toronto are growing. I'd like you to focus on the orange spaces on this map, which is from the Parkland Strategy Refresh 2022, put out by the City of Toronto, by their Parks, Forestry, and Recreation Department. You can see a lot of pressure, development pressure is in the downtown, a little bit in the West End, Midtown, and North York. This is where there's a lot of residential growth right now. And as we add more residents, there's more demand for parkland. So just as a reminder, or a little more focus, the alternative parkland dedication rate, this is how it works now. So there's a calculation that is based on the value of a site size. I say now because the city is currently proposing to change it based on the density of a development proposal so that it can capture the increased future parkland demand based on the number of new residents. It's worth noting that in 2017, a city staff report showed that the increases in project densities were not being captured as sufficient parkland dedication. I'd like to also highlight that Toronto is missing a green space standard. So unlike other cities, like the Washington, DC, or Los Angeles, or Greater London, which in Washington, DC's case, it's higher than ours. We don't have a publicly disclosed figure. So currently the estimate is that by 2034, there'll be 25 square meters of parkland per person in Toronto, compared with 28 square meters in 2016. That's a 10% reduction. That's coming from all the development pressures that are projected to occur and that are occurring right now. So it's also worth knowing that the WHO states that an ideal value of 50 square meters of green space per person is what cities should be aiming for. So what I want to highlight here is that there's no publicly disclosed figure for the city of Toronto. So this is from 2019. This is when there was last public disclosure on the status of cash-in-lieu contributions for parkland in Toronto. And my MRP focused on these contributions from developers and how there can be barriers reduced to spending this money more quickly for parkland acquisition. The highlighted number there is what the total potential number of dollars is that can be used. It's in Canadian dollars, that's $237 million. And that had not been committed. So it could theoretically be used for parkland acquisition even though there's this figure for parkland acquisition by itself, all these funds could be used. There are complex spending rules hampering the use of existing funds. For instance, the city must quote unquote save up the full amount of funds to purchase a property that it wants for parkland purposes. It cannot finance a purchase in the way that a developer or land speculator can. For example, the city cannot go to the bank and say, I need a $20 million loan because I'm short for a $60 million purchase price on a property. The city can't do that. It needs to save up the full amount. Thus, the city is not able to move quickly as the financial sector, the residential development sector, to purchase property for parkland. It's also worth noting that rising land values in Toronto make these challenges more challenging right now, especially during this age of COVID-19. I did my MRP while municipalities across Ontario were reviewing their parkland dedication rates. It was part of a provincial directive that all municipalities had to pass a new bylaw on parkland dedication rates by September 18, 2022, or they will no longer be able to collect cash-in-lieu contributions from development projects. So municipalities are active on this file as we speak, and Toronto is no exception. I'm laying out here what the stages have been of this consultation process, as well as this review process. And it started spring 2021, and there have been consultations with the public and industry on this. The major change that is happening that I'll underline again is that the parkland dedication rate is currently based on lot size, and the city is proposing to make it based on density. If you wanted to know more about it, I recommend you Google quote City of Toronto growth funding tools, and you'll find a page dedicated to it. The public can provide their input on this. If you support this proposal of making the dedication rate focus on density as opposed to lot size, make your voice heard by emailing city staff, your councillor, the mayor. It's worth knowing that writing in support of an item at the executive committee meeting in July 12th specifically, is an effective way to help get this approved. Next, I'd like to talk about Indigenous protected and conserved areas. In Toronto, Indigenous-led conservation could mean engaging with the Municipal Indigenous Affairs Office at the City of Toronto, as well as the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation as first steps. Indigenous-led and or stewarded conservation through an Indigenous protected and conserved area is something that allows Indigenous peoples to use their knowledge to conserve land in partnership with governments. On this map, you'll see that the blue dots represent IPCAs that currently exist in Canada, which are in BC, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. There are also others that are being worked out. In the context of my MRP, I reflect on how settlers, like myself, have influenced the land through our planning decisions. And I think about how parks and open spaces across the city, like City of Toronto, like Downsview Park, and I reflect on how we can reconcile our history with Indigenous peoples, what roles parks can play with that. I wonder how we can engage in partnership with Indigenous peoples in these park stewardship. And I also wonder how we can engage in a way that's not extractive. Perhaps IPCAs or a derivation thereof provide a way forward for both Indigenous reconciliation and parkland expansion in Toronto. This is a list of the financial tools that I researched and that are available to read about in my MRP. I'll be focusing specifically in this presentation on concessional finance, green bonds, resilience bonds, catastrophe bonds as well, and urban green space bonds, a new innovation. So concessional finance is when a public or private financial institution provides more favorable loan terms to attract investment capital. These terms can mean that a party offers lower than market interest rates to reduce a project's cost of capital. So such an arrangement can help make projects financially attractive to private financial institutions. It can also mean that certain investors will accept junior terms, for example, first loss. Here's an example here, forest resilience bond. So there's a funding gap in the state of California in the US for addressing forest management and wildfire risks, and it's estimated to be $6 billion US. The forest resilience bond helps the speed and scale of forest restoration in the US, Western US specifically. And here's a breakdown of how it works. Blue Forest Conservation, a fund manager, the Tahoe National Forest, the Yuba Water Agency, and the National Forest Fund used a $4 million bond issued to protect 15,000 hectares of forest from wildfire risk. Additional foundations committed concessional financing at below market rates, which allowed for private investors like Calvert Impact Capital and CSAA Insurance Group to obtain higher rates of return on their investments. Concessional finance can have pre-agreed set of outcomes in a financial product. So in the forest resilience bonds case, it had outcomes around better water quality. If concessional finance were used in the city of Toronto for parkland acquisition, it could mean including outcomes like identifying and engaging the beneficiaries of cleaner ravine and or lake water from parkland acquisition. And who wouldn't want that? Maybe that would mean more days playing in Lake Ontario in the summer. Green bonds. So first, let's talk about what bonds are. It's a form of debt. It's where the money is raised, where the money raised is used, or what are called use of proceeds to fund predetermined activities. So that's a boring bond definition. But a green bond functions in a similar way, but the labeling and purposes are different. It's a fixed income product or debt that is issued to finance environmental projects. So high investor demand for this asset can allow for green bonds to be sold at a premium, reducing the cost of servicing debt. It's worth noting that every year there's been seemingly a record-breaking trend globally in green bond issuances, and last year was no exception. $481 billion US were issued on green bonds alone last year. But Toronto is also in the mix here, and we have this great green debenture framework. We've issued 4 green bonds, cumulatively valued at $780 million Canadian since 2018. Proceeds have been used to fund tree planting at the Leslie Barnes TTC streetcar yard and the Portland's flood protection project, which is a park that's doubling as flood protection area. It's quite visionary. There's an illustration of it here as it's under construction. Payments to investors for these bonds are funded through the city's general revenues. So that essentially means property tax contributions or user fees go into those accounts, and that's what's being used to pay back these investors on these bond issuances. I wonder, what else can we do with green bonds in the city of Toronto? Where can we get multiple benefits for this at once? I believe that we can use green bonds for parkland acquisition, especially in the context of increased flood risk. It's also worth noting that this is something that's a bit of a homegrown innovation, so we should be a little bit proud of it and celebrate it too. And neighboring municipalities can use it too. Here's a breakdown from the city website of each of these bond issuances. You can see the coupon rate or the interest rate that's being paid on them, the amounts of each issuance, and how long they're ongoing for. It's a real thing. Okay, catastrophe bonds. These bonds were created after Hurricane Andrew struck the US in 1992. This product transfers risk to the capital markets, alleviating pressure on government coffers for payouts when disasters strike. So this is an insurance policy where the policyholder receives a payout when a disaster reaches a predetermined threshold. Loss and damage-based triggers set a threshold based on the total insured or total economic losses experienced by a single firm. What's otherwise known as an indemnity. And it's also can be based on wind speed or storm surges at specific locations. Talk about the triggers here. The aim of a catastrophe bond or a CAT bond is not to limit physical damages, but to reduce economic losses and financial disruptions. In 2020, there was a record $11 billion US issued in catastrophe bonds. I'm going to talk about something that's similar to this that can be applied as an innovation, but I had to talk about this first for the baseline. I'm going to talk about resilience bonds, and here's a chart showing how they're similar to catastrophe bonds, except resilience bonds are designed to, quote unquote, fund proactive risk reduction and reactive disaster recovery. So resilience bonds have a, quote, resilience rebate that can fund risk reduction projects. In our case, this could mean nature-based solutions or parkland acquisition. The quote unquote resilience rebate, think about it like a private health insurance company that incentivizes a policyholder to make healthy choices, for instance, quitting smoking. And they do that incentivization through lower premia because of the lower long-term risks and healthcare costs associated with no longer smoking. The European Bank of Reconstruction and Development issued the first ever dedicated climate resilience bond in September 2019. And I was pleased to recently learn, preparing for this webinar, that since then it has issued 1.2 billion euros through 12 climate resilience bonds. So in Canadian dollars, that's 1.66 billion. The proceeds for the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development's CRB are being used to fund water, agriculture, and municipal and environmental infrastructure, among others. I wonder if parks are being included in that. It is seeking through these bonds to reduce weather-related damage and disruption. These projects are happening in Eastern Europe, Northern Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. I believe, and I'm a bit bullish on resilience bonds because I believe they can be well suited to funding flood mitigation and making parkland dedication an ideal candidate for their application in Toronto. Lastly, this is a bit of an exciting idea, an urban green space bond. The idea was provided to me by Jeremy Guth, board member at the Woodcock Foundation. This would be a bond that would be backed by the $31 million in the Parkland Acquisition Reserve Fund in 2019. It would pay out a 5% annual coupon. So with this math, we came up with a $623.7 million Canadian bond that could be issued for the city of Toronto to fund parkland acquisition across the city. It could be connected spaces across the city, or it could be spread out in different parcels around the city. The imagination is up to us, but at the moment we're limited because it's not currently allowed in the regulatory regime in Ontario. Both growth pressures in Toronto and the slowness of parkland acquisition. Maybe we need bold ideas and actions. So in conclusion, I want this research to get out into practice. I want the public to also take up the cause. So here's what you can do. Number one, email the City of Toronto's Executive Committee before July 12th and tell them that you support the new proposal to the alternative parkland dedication rate based on density, not site value. Number two, when they come to your door or on the street, ask mayoral candidates and council candidates what their plan is to fund parkland. The election's coming up in October. Number three, maybe you're buying a property, maybe you're buying a new condo. Tell the developer you want to see green space there, or ask them what their plan is for integrating this. That's my presentation. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take your questions now. I see one question from Gil Peñalosa. Okay. Let me read the whole question. Okay, Gil. So this is an idea that came up in some of the interviews I had. So you can think of streets, maybe I'm thinking here of places like Scarborough, North York, Etobicoke, more suburban areas. I mean, we see them in the old city of Toronto too, along the road. You can convert that into park space. I don't see why not. I think the barrier here is mindset or mentality, whether it's the city or others to persuade them to do it. But there's big potential here because it has stormwater management benefits, and my understanding is that Canada and Toronto will see more rain as climate change takes hold in the next few years. So I think this is, and if you wanted to read through my MRP, I do talk about this. So I'm open to that idea. I would also say that some of the ideas here don't have to be big bang, big visionary ideas, right? I mean, I think we need some quick wins as well in doing some things like buying or converting space that's public right now and making it more green space in different parts of the city is something that we need to do. But I think it's going to take, I think it's going to take people speaking up and asking about it as well. Hi, Charisse. Thanks for that excellent question. So when I was interviewing someone who worked at a organization that would provide second party opinions on bonds, they told me that one of the things about bonds, green bonds specifically, is that you can issue them, it's all great, but they should have a social equity component or a social positive social impact component to them. So I would say that's definitely something worth doing. I mean, one of the things I was looking at in the MRP, a big thing is, and I was asking about this, is what about engaging equity deserving communities on this? Often some of the best park spaces are in the suburbs close to equity deserving communities. I'm thinking of, for instance, I'm thinking of Thorncliffe Park. You know, there's Cottonwood Flats not far from there, but the wayfinding is substandard to get from that neighborhood to the park and to the ravines. So I think a quick win there in that case is better wayfinding. But aside from that, there's certainly opportunity in the suburban areas, and better to do it now than later if land values are going to keep rising. negotiate these ideas. Maybe we need to, if there's someone from TCHC on the line, that would be great. And any case studies on that, top of my head, I can't think of one, but I can look at my MRP and see what I got. Get back to you, Charisse. Maureen Wilson. I would love to visit Hamilton. I like Hamilton, so I would be happy to visit to share my work. Maybe feel free to reach out. Okay, Pamela. So that's an excellent question. I did focus on the city of Toronto with my MRP. However, I did make it in a way that it could be applicable in different places. So I would suggest going through it. I mean, I will send it to you. And in terms of different approaches for different cities, I recognize, I mean, a barrier here is that in Canada, each province, which are our regional government, our regional system, has a different regime to a degree when it comes to planning. So it would be different in different places. However, I still think there's something that can be taken from different jurisdictions that I talk about in the MRP that would apply for you. Okay, Ellen Schwartzel. That's an excellent question. My understanding is that a big barrier there is maybe building support among members of the public who would want to see more of these golf courses transformed to naturally publicly accessible areas. So I would say a number of these funding mechanisms can be used. It could be concessional financing, it could be a bond, but I mean, that's like, that'd be more in the case of a privately owned property, but if it's publicly owned, so Alan's question was, as an alliance of ENGO groups has been arguing that Toronto's municipally owned golf courses should be transformed to naturalized, publicly accessible lands. Any thoughts on how your funding mechanisms could help there? So in this case, we're talking about something municipally owned. We could use some of these tools that we have right now for the operation of it, right? So maybe there are rental fees there for having some events, and that can be used to fund the operations and maintenance of that site. Imagining and assuming it gets converted into something that's publicly accessible. The barrier that I understand exists with golf courses is that there needs to be buy-in from the public to make this happen, and support that goes politically towards council to get council in Toronto to move on something like this, because the interests of golfers could be entrenched and it's something to overcome. But it was done in Bogota in the 1990s, and I think it's something that perhaps this alliance of ENGO groups may consider, is building those bridges with communities who may want to support this change. Adam Madison, looking forward to digging into MRP a bit more. When you were looking at international comparators, were those figures listed at municipal or regional level? And how do you know if they included all green space, naturalized lands, environmentally protected lands, easements for things like utility corridors, or are they just parkland? So I don't have an answer with that degree of detail. The source I used was an academic paper that took in, I believe it took in a general amount, but I don't think it was broken down in such a sophisticated way. Okay, Sam Carter, Shemai. In addition to parks acquisition, are there any more widely applicable learnings that you can draw / extrapolate as pertains to environmental interventions and other types of spaces? Thinking about entities like the Bentway, which operate in a conservancy model, and largely on lands which are not, strictly speaking, parks, but do provide much park-like services and have great potential to enable sustainability, resilience, and climate change adaptation impacts. Okay, so here I would say I would note that idea earlier that Gil Peñalosa mentioned around having public space like along roads be converted to parkland. I think that can be something that can be explored. Maybe something that can be more experimentation of that. So, and something I would say that would be useful to look at that was not covered in my MRP just because of the focus that I had is something like I've seen done in Vancouver, and I've read about happening in Vancouver with boulevards and citizens being, allowed to grow plants there, vegetables or flowers. So I would say I think those types of interventions need to be a little more flexible on because in some places people don't have a lot of space and maybe that's where they want to use it. And if we can have that level of stewardship or ownership felt by local citizens, why not? And also I think other types of interventions that could be done it can be hydro corridors, right? There's the Meadowway in East Toronto. There's also this idea of, I think the Green Line is what it's called, going through the west end of Toronto. I'm not sure what the status is of that right now, but I think what it takes is imagination. Why don't we take the energy we're putting into bricks and mortar, literally into building or glass and concrete. Let's apply some of that energy towards this, because I think if anything we learned and we shouldn't forget over the last 2.5 years is that we need space for this sort of diversion and calmness and tranquility that we get in parks. Okay, Pamela, did you investigate the long-term funding needs and maintenance acquisitions? The focus tends to be on protection acquisition processes, but this is the first step. There's a need for an endowment to go a long way with the acquisition to provide perpetual care for parks. Yes, I agree. So that's something I would, I don't want to leave you and say, this is it, right? No, I mean, this is something I've spoken about with other park departments is that you need to budget for maintenance and operations, right? So something to keep in mind, and I don't want to rain on anyone's parade here, but we need to buy parks, but we also need to budget and think that we need to maintain these parks afterwards. I can think of the city of Madrid where I was last year on vacation, and there were individuals working for the Parks Commission doing maintenance daily, right? And there's a cost for that, and we need to, if we want this, we also need to keep in mind, hey, it's not for free. Like we're also going to pony up for this over the long term too. Let's see. Okay, Gil Peñalosa. The question is about public golf courses, and I believe this is going to be the last question that I'll be answering. It's about public golf courses. So public golf course areas are used by 200 well-off people per day, 6 months a year, 24 hours. It can be turned into a public park for thousands, 365 days. There's absolutely no moral or ethical justification to have public golf courses in any city with deficit of housing or parks. What if instead a golf course that had 10 cricket pitches? Would any elected official support the cricket pitches over half area for park and half for housing? Sounds like a call to action. I would say maybe that's the fourth call to action out of this presentation. So I'm open to seeing what people say on that. I think it's an exciting idea, but I think that this is something that again requires a level of commitment of engaging with the public to see what the support is and making it happen. So those are my answers to those questions, this rapid fire style questions. Thank you very much for attending, and feel free to get in touch afterwards and enjoy your days and maybe spend some time in a park today. Bye everyone.